Let me start with a truth that many of us feel but rarely admit. You can have success, you can have money, you can even have recognition, yet without true connection, your life will feel empty, because connection is not a luxury. It is the very reason we are here. It is what gives meaning to every achievement and depth to every joy. Without it, nothing ever feels complete. I once believed that the answer to a meaningful life was clarity and control. I thought if I could study enough, measure enough, and explain enough, I could solve the puzzle of human happiness. I wanted to organize life into neat boxes, free of the mess of emotion, free of the chaos of uncertainty. But the more I studied, the more I listened, the more stories I collected, the more I realized that the very thing I was trying to avoid was the one thing that made life worth living: connection. It was everywhere in the stories people shared. It was in their highest moments and in their deepest pain. It showed up not in their tales of triumph, but in their memories of heartbreak, rejection, and loneliness. I began to see a pattern. When I asked people about love, they told me about loss. When I asked about belonging, they told me about exclusion. When I asked about connection, they told me about disconnection. It was as if the very thing we most desire reveals itself most clearly when it is missing. And then I discovered something that shook me. The enemy of connection was not distance or difference, it was shame. That quiet voice that whispers, you are not enough, not thin enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not worthy enough. It was universal. Every person I spoke with carried it. And the more they tried to hide it, the heavier it became. That realization changed everything. It made me see that life is not about avoiding discomfort. It is about leaning into it, because the doorway to connection is not perfection. It is vulnerability. And vulnerability is terrifying because it demands we show up without guarantees. It demands that we risk being seen as we are not, as we wish to appear. So I began a new journey, a journey not to escape the mess of human experience, but to embrace it, to ask not how can I protect myself from being hurt, but how can I live in a way that allows me to be truly seen? And the answer was simple, but not easy. Connection happens when we dare to let down our guard, when we risk the possibility of rejection for the hope of belonging, when we stop hiding behind titles, behind achievements, behind masks, and step into the light as ourselves. This was the beginning of a radical shift, because the truth is, connection is not built on power or perfection. It is built on presence, on the courage to sit with discomfort, on the willingness to be seen fully, scars and all. And the more I leaned into that truth, the more I understood why so many of us feel alone. Even in crowded rooms, we are waiting to be accepted without ever daring to show who we really are. And that is the hook of this message. If you want a life of meaning, if you want to experience love that lasts and belonging that grounds you, it will never come from hiding. It will only come when you choose to step into the risk of being seen. It will come when you embrace vulnerability and allow it to guide you to the very connection you were created for. If you want to understand why so many of us struggle to feel truly connected, you have to look beneath the surface, because what stands in the way of connection is not always obvious. It is not the people we meet or the opportunities we lack. It is something deeper, more hidden, and far more powerful. It is shame. Shame is the quiet but relentless whisper that says you are not enough. It is the voice that rises when you fail, when you stumble, when you dare to step out and be seen. It says you are not smart enough, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not worthy enough. And even if you achieve more or gain more, the voice never goes silent. It only changes its tone. You are not successful enough. You are not lovable enough. You are not safe enough. Shame is universal. Every human being carries it in some form. The only people who do not are those who have lost the capacity for empathy and connection altogether. But most of us, we carry it quietly. We pretend it is not there. We build walls to cover it. We push ourselves harder to outrun it. But the truth is, the less we acknowledge it, the more power it has over us. The danger of shame is that it is built on fear, the fear of disconnection, the fear that if others truly see who we are, they will turn away. They will decide we are unworthy of their love, unworthy of belonging, unworthy of being chosen. And so we hide our flaws, our insecurities, our deepest truths. We show the world only the parts we believe will win approval. And yet every time we hide a piece of ourselves, we weaken our ability to connect, because real connection requires honesty, and honesty cannot survive behind masks. Think about the times when you wanted to belong so badly that you adjusted yourself to fit the room. Maybe you laughed at a joke that hurt. Maybe you stayed silent when you wanted to speak. Maybe you acted like everything was fine when inside you were breaking. Those choices were not about being kind or keeping peace. They were about shame, about the fear that if you showed up as your real self, you would be rejected. And here is the painful irony. The very thing we do to protect ourselves from rejection is what keeps us from experiencing true acceptance. I learned through thousands of stories that shame is always close when people talk about love, belonging, and connection. Ask about love and you will hear stories of heartbreak. Ask about belonging and you will hear stories of exclusion. Ask about connection and you will hear stories of disconnection. And in all of those stories, shame is the thread that runs through them. It convinces us that we are not enough, and so we hold back. But connection is only possible when we dare to risk being seen. The truth that changed me is this: worthiness is not about achieving enough to silence shame. Worthiness is about believing that you are enough, even in the face of it. The people who live with deep love and belonging are not the ones who never feel shame. They are the ones who face it and still choose to believe they are worthy. They refuse to let shame dictate their value. They acknowledge its presence, but do not bow to its voice. And here is what makes that so powerful. Once you believe you are worthy, you stop chasing the approval of those who cannot give it. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop hiding pieces of yourself just to feel safe. You begin to show up as you are. And in that moment, you open the door to real connection. Because the people who truly see you and stay, those are the ones you were searching for all along. Shame will always whisper. It will always try to convince you that you must do more, be more, prove more to deserve love. But worthiness is not earned, it is embraced. And the moment you choose to believe you are enough as you are, you break the cycle. You silence the lie that has held you hostage. You step into a new way of living where connection is no longer something you chase, but something you naturally create. There came a point in my research when I had to stop and face a startling reality. Out of thousands of interviews and stories, there was one pattern I could not ignore. Some people lived with a deep sense of love and belonging, while others spent their lives chasing it, always wondering if they were good enough. And when I compared the two groups, I expected to find a long list of differences, but there was only one. The people who experienced real connection believed they were worthy of love and belonging. That was it. They were not more successful. They were not more popular. They were not spared from struggle or failure. The difference was a belief, a conviction deep inside that said, I am enough. I called these people wholehearted because they lived not from a place of proving, but from a place of being. They had the courage to show up imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others. And they had the authenticity to let go of who they thought they should be in order to embrace who they really were. These three qualities, courage, compassion, and authenticity, formed the foundation of their lives. Courage is often misunderstood. We think of courage as heroic acts or bold risks, but the original meaning of courage comes from the Latin word cor, meaning heart. To have courage is to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart, is what the wholehearted did. They dared to be imperfect. They dared to let their lives be messy. They dared to love without guarantees. They were not fearless, but they were willing to step into fear with honesty. Compassion was another key, and it started not with others, but with themselves. The wholehearted understood that you cannot practice real compassion for others if you do not first extend it to yourself. They were not perfect at it, but they refused to keep punishing themselves for every flaw. They allowed themselves grace, and that grace spilled over into how they treated others. Instead of judgment, they offered understanding. Instead of comparison, they offered kindness. Authenticity may have been the hardest of all, because authenticity demands that you let go of the mask of who you think you should be in order to live as who you are. That is terrifying because it risks rejection. It risks being misunderstood. It risks standing alone, but the wholehearted chose it again and again because they knew the price of pretending was far greater than the cost of rejection. They knew connection cannot thrive when we are playing a role. It can only thrive when we are real. And at the center of all of this was vulnerability. The wholehearted did not see vulnerability as weakness. They saw it as the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, and creativity. They described it not as comfortable or easy, but as necessary. They were willing to say, I love you first. They were willing to step into opportunities without guarantees. They were willing to wait through uncertainty to hope, even when the outcome was unclear. They believed what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. This was the truth that broke me open, because I had spent years believing that safety and certainty were the keys to a good life. I thought control would protect me from pain, but the research was clear. The very thing I had been running from, vulnerability, was the thing that made connection possible. The wholehearted were not living safe lives, they were living brave ones. And in their bravery, they found what so many of us spend our lives searching for: a deep, unshakable sense of love and belonging. The lesson was undeniable. If you want connection, you cannot wait until you feel perfect. If you want love, you cannot wait until you are certain. If you want belonging, you cannot keep pretending. The path is through courage, compassion, authenticity, and vulnerability. It is not easy, but it is the only way. And when you choose it, you begin to live not just with success, but with meaning, not just with comfort, but with fullness, not just with survival, but with joy. We live in a world that tells us to hide our vulnerability, a world that rewards certainty over curiosity, image over authenticity, control over courage. We are taught that strength means never showing weakness, that perfection is the goal, that safety is found in never taking risks. But what I discovered is that this way of living does not protect us. It imprisons us. It leaves us disconnected, exhausted, and numb. One of the greatest challenges with vulnerability today is the way we try to avoid it. We numb when life feels uncertain, when emotions feel overwhelming. We reach for distractions. We drink, we scroll, we shop, we binge. We tell ourselves it is just to take the edge off. But the truth is, you cannot selectively numb emotion. You cannot silence fear without also silencing joy. You cannot push away disappointment without also pushing away gratitude. And so while we may succeed in dulling the pain, we also dull the beauty of life. We become a generation chasing pleasure, but missing meaning. Another way we avoid vulnerability is by making everything certain. We replace dialogue with declarations. We trade curiosity for judgment. We turn faith into rigid rules and politics into shouting matches. We cling to certainty because uncertainty feels unbearable, but certainty at all cost kills connection, because real connection requires listening, it requires humility, it requires space for difference. And when we demand certainty, we shut the door on all of it. We also we perfect our bodies, our careers, our families, our reputations. We convince ourselves that if we look flawless and act flawless, we will finally be safe from judgment. But perfection is a prison. It suffocates authenticity and keeps us locked in shame. Because no matter how hard we try, we are never flawless. And the more we chase perfection, the further we run from the very connection we crave. And then we blame. Because when vulnerability makes us uncomfortable, it is easier to point the finger than to face the truth. Blame becomes a way to discharge pain, but it never solves it. It only spreads it. Blame turns relationships into battlefields and communities into divided camps. It creates winners and losers, but never healing. Perhaps the most heartbreaking impact of avoiding vulnerability is on our children. We look at them, and instead of preparing them for struggle, we try to shield them from it. We try to make them perfect. We tell ourselves their worth is tied to achievements, grades, appearances, teams. But children are not wired for perfection. They are wired for struggle. They do not need to be flawless to be worthy. They need to know they are loved even when they fail. When we teach them that their worth is conditional, we pass on the very shame that keeps us trapped. This is not just personal, it is cultural. When companies hide mistakes, when leaders refuse to admit failure, when institutions value image over integrity, we all pay the price. We live in a society desperate for authenticity, yet terrified of what it requires. We long for leaders who are real, but we reward those who are polished. We crave relationships that are honest, but we settle for shallow connections that feel safe. The challenge is clear. Vulnerability is not comfortable. It never has been. It is messy, uncertain, and often painful, but the cost of avoiding it is far greater, because when we numb, when we perfect, when we blame, when we cling to certainty, we lose the very things that make life worth living: joy, gratitude, love, belonging. The question is not whether we will face vulnerability. The question is what we will do when it shows up. Will we run from it, or will we lean into it? Will we numb it, or will we embrace it? Will we hide behind masks, or will we choose to be seen? For the truth is this: vulnerability is not weakness. It is the path to connection. And the more we resist it, the more we miss out on the fullness of life. The greatest decision you will ever make is to stop running from your vulnerability and start embracing it, because vulnerability is not weakness. It is the birthplace of everything that gives life meaning. Love requires it. Belonging depends on it. Joy is impossible without it. And yet most of us spend our lives trying to avoid it, believing the lie that if we stay guarded, we will be safe. But safe is not the same as alive. Safe may keep you from pain, but it will also keep you from purpose. To live with courage is to let yourself be seen, truly seen, scars and all. It is to risk saying, I love you first. It is to risk showing up for a relationship without knowing how it will end. It is to risk believing in a dream that may fail or fighting for a cause that may cost you. It is choosing to live with your whole heart, even when you know there are no guarantees. The wholehearted people I studied did not claim that vulnerability was easy. They described it as necessary. They spoke of the trembling moments when they waited for the phone call after a diagnosis, the nights when they told the truth not knowing how it would be received, the mornings when they walked into uncertainty still choosing to hope. They called those moments not comfortable but beautiful. The practice of embracing vulnerability begins with gratitude, because gratitude is what grounds you when fear rises, when you are tempted to catastrophize every what if. Gratitude is the choice to stop and say, I am thankful to feel this deeply because it means I am alive. Gratitude shifts your focus from what you cannot control to what you have been given. It reminds you that even in uncertainty, life is still a gift. Living with vulnerability also requires redefining strength. Strength is not about pretending you do not hurt. Strength is not about numbing yourself until you feel nothing. Strength is about showing up anyway. It is about standing in the storm without pretending the rain does not fall. It is about refusing to let fear of pain steal the possibility of joy. That kind of strength does not come from perfection. It comes from presence. Another key is believing you are enough, because without this belief, vulnerability will always feel unbearable. If you think you must earn love or prove your worth, then every risk will feel like a test you cannot pass. But when you choose to believe I am enough, you step into freedom. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop hiding for safety. You begin to live as if love and belonging are not prizes to be won, but truths to be lived. And this belief changes how you treat yourself and others. When you work from a place of worthiness, you become kinder, gentler, more willing to listen. You stop screaming to be heard and start listening to understand. You stop punishing yourself for being imperfect and start offering yourself compassion. And as you extend that compassion inward, it overflows outward. You show up for others, not from fear, but from fullness. Embracing vulnerability also means rejecting the myths that keep us trapped. The myth that you must be flawless before you can be loved. The myth that certainty guarantees safety. The myth that control creates peace. None of those are true. The reality is that the most meaningful moments in life come when you risk being open, when you risk being seen, when you risk being hurt, because in those moments you discover the depth of your own courage. Imagine a life where you no longer hide behind masks. Imagine relationships built not on performance, but on authenticity. Imagine waking up each day knowing that no matter what happens, you are enough, that life is not without pain, but it is rich with purpose. That is the gift of vulnerability. It does not promise an easy road, but it promises a real one. So the invitation is clear. Do not wait for perfect conditions. Do not wait until you feel fearless. Do not wait until you are certain. Step into vulnerability now. Let yourself be seen. Love with your whole heart. Practice gratitude when fear rises. Believe that you are enough, because when you do, you will discover a freedom, a joy, and a belonging that no amount of safety could ever provide. And in that choice, you will not just survive, you will truly live